Buckle up. Bottom of page 47. Besides a seeming inability to accept much on faith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice. That's what stands between me and these new ideas. I'm obstinate, I'm stubborn, I'm thick-skulled, and then I'm oversensitive. I don't want my feelings hurt, and frankly, I don't like the feeling of pain too much. And then there's the unreasoning prejudice, which covers the rest of it, which doesn't allow me ideas that don't even allow me to consider the new ideas. Many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Here's the motivator. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. So if I can believe that I'm facing my death, my destruction, it'll open my mind. That's what they're saying. I was just talking to a staff member on the break, and a guy that went through here a little over a year ago just killed himself 2 days ago on his birthday. He's on probation. He did a dirty UA, and he went home and killed himself. It happens all the time. It happens all the time. The reader may still ask why he should believe in the power greater than himself. We think there are good reasons. So let's look at some. So they're going to give us some good reasons why we should try and embrace the God idea. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes them without a murmur or doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Simply because it's impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without a reasonable assumption as a starting point. So when you flip the switch, it's out of faith. I don't have to know how electricity is made to use it. I don't have to understand the God thing to benefit from it. I don't have to have a conception fully formed. I don't even have to have a fully formed belief. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. Does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof of all? It's being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. 1939, 1935. The prosaic steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there's an all-powerful, guiding, creative intelligence, all synonyms. Right there, our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. This is how I convince myself. I read wordy books, indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Were our contention is true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. That was my anthem. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the alpha and the omega, the beginning and end of it all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? They're just saying, isn't it a little arrogant to think you know? We have traveled this dubious path, this questionable path. Beg you to lay aside prejudice. They talk about that a lot. Lay aside your prejudging, even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. There's an idea in this girder illustration that is, we are sense-based. We have 5 senses, and they are what bring all the data into our mind. Sight, smell, taste, hearing, touch. That's the input for our mind, our perceptions. And we base what we do and think on those perceptions. Are you with me? It makes sense? I mean, that's kind of how the thing works, right? Got these 5 input centers, and they throw it all into the main computer, and the computer sorts it, analyzes it, contrasts it, and tells you what's going on. That's really useful for like, oh, I got to pee. Oh, I'm thirsty. Oh, time to eat. I think I'll stretch. It's too hot. I think I'll take a shirt off. It's too cold. I think I'll put a jacket on. Looks like rain. Better plan ahead. Pulls out the file card on rain and what we need for rain. And, oh, that's fine. But when it changes and it gets morphed through that defensive, selfish, self-centered, fear-based creation that is my ego, this is what happens. I come into the room and I go, what's your problem? My senses are telling me there's something not right here. I looked at your face. I didn't like the way it looked. And so my mind said, when we see faces like this, this is what we think. And all those thoughts come filing up to the front, and I'm going, you son of a bitch, you're going to have to die. You're going to have to die before dinner. That's what you're going to have to do. And not only do I do that, I make up a story about you. What's going on with him that he would look at me like that? I'll give you an example. Guy in my meeting. I come in, perception. Beginning of the meeting, I like to talk to everyone. I like to say hi to everyone. And so Dennis comes in and says, hey, Dennis, how you doing? He doesn't respond. Doesn't look up. I go, what's with Dennis? I go, well, whatever. You know, and then I'm watching Dennis during the meeting. I'm thinking, he's a little cocky tonight, isn't he? He is a little. Yeah, look at, my perceptions are starting to work now, my keen sense. Yeah, and I'm thinking about this, and I'm still minimizing, kind of like Jim. You know, I was a little irritated with my boss, but no big deal. So Dennis ignored me. God, I don't like being ignored. Do you? No, I don't. Well, whatever. You know, and I'm not in the meeting anymore. I'm in my head. Meeting ends, I go away, and I'm just periodically revisiting this thing about Dennis. You know, they say about resentments. You revisit them, you replay, you refeel your hurt, and it grows. So I'm starting to concentrate on Dennis, and pretty soon I'm going, I think that son of a bitch snubbed me. You know, who does he think he is? And I'm making up this big story. And there was a time back in 1933 when he did this and that and that. And I'm building a case against Dennis. Now, it's a week till the meeting. By the time I get back to the meeting, I'm loaded. I got both guns loaded. I'm ready to go. Dennis, we're going to talk. You know, and I go, hey, Denny, you know, last week, what? I said, hey, Denny, what? He said, I'm deaf in this ear, and my hearing aids are in the shop. I can't hear a damn thing. Oh, never mind. But my perception, and then the story I made up about that perception, is what I believed to be real. And I acted on it. I got the information from Dennis that I needed to correct that misperception. They use the steel girder, you know, and they say, geez, you know, looks like a solid surface. If any of you read any of the modern physicists, they're all talking about God. They're all talking about God. And they took it right down to the atomic level. And they said, you know, this seems to be solid, but if you look at it really closely with a big microscope, It's made up of all these tiny little pieces that are just vibrating like hell. And wood vibrates at 30,000 million pieces a second, and steel vibrates at 160,000, and your skin vibrates at this, and it's all just these different compositions of these basic elements that are just vibrating like a son of a bitch. You know, and you look inside this thing, and now you've got the structure of an atom, and the distance equivalence between these parts is like a baseball sitting in the middle of a football stadium. There's a huge distance in space there, and the question is, what is holding all that in position? What is the fuel source? How does it know to vibrate at that frequency? And how does it keep it? And where is it getting its supply? And they're going, the emptiness is the stuff of the universe. That's the God thing. Now that energy informs everything. So thoughts become causal. Because they have energy. You pull up a thought, everyone's doing it. Every thought you pull up has got a weight to it, based on where you're at. Thought comes up, you're spiritually fit, you go, that's a nonsense thought. You're not spiritually fit, you go, good idea. Good idea. We like that idea. And we don't even see where that idea is going. So this idea that I trust my senses, my perceptions, your perception is you're sitting in a rectangular room at about 78 degrees, with artificial light, Your body, your senses aren't telling you anything about the globe you're on that's spinning, that's hurtling through space. It's not telling you anything about the weather outside. It doesn't know shit. That's my point. So why am I basing everything I think and do on this false sense of information? It's not bad for some things. It's exquisite for some things. But the things that work the best in me are the things that are automated. I don't have to sit around thinking about breathing. I don't have to think about processing the toxins out of my blood. I got kidneys and liver for that, and it just works fine without me thinking about it at all. The stuff that works best in me is automated, or God-automated. So anyway, that's the question. It's trying to get me at the way I look at things, the perceptions I have, because I'm basing my actions on my perceptions and the value I place on them. So they're saying, please, 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 set that down. So instead, on page 50, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. We talked of intolerance while we were intolerant. Oh, that's an ugly thing to get in front of, isn't it? We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. In our personal stories, you'll find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. They are questions for each individual to settle for himself. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. Gained access to, that's in relationship with, and believes in power greater than themselves. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. As a celebrated American statement put it, let's look at the record. Again, the inference here is, I am going to get in front of the thinking problems I have. You're going to do that in your 4-step inventory. Okay? And we're going to attack some ideas like power, powerless, surrender, acceptance, that sort of thing. But what's going to happen is when you get all that stuff organized, you're still powerless over it. It's nice that it's in columns. It's nice that you can see some new facts about yourself. But more importantly, over in the end of that is how did I show up? When you did this and this and this and this, and I had a resentment and this is how I was affected, how did I react? That's the piece I can change. But you can't change how you react until you change how you think. And what happens is we organize all these thinkings, perceptions, reactions in this 4-step inventory. Talk to someone about it. What do? We give it to God in 6 and 7. Because the power is what's going to change that, not me. If I could change it, I wouldn't need the power. I'd be the power. But I can't change it. This is the serenity prayer, This is what I can do. This is as much as I can do. This is my turf. Organize, uncover, discover, right? And discard. And I discard it to the care of God. And I move on with the restitution phase. I don't have the power to fix me. I have the power to get me to the place where I can be fixed. What we're doing is we're creating a space in our thinking, in our consciousness, if you will, that allows God to come in and operate. There is no room for God when I'm full of fear, hate, and resentment, and guilt, shame, and remorse. There is no room for God. God meets me in my mind. God meets me in my thoughts. If there's no room in my thinking, there's no room for God. So I got the veto power. No God, thank you. I'm busy thinking. Too busy thinking. So, here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe, second step, in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power, maybe the third step, to do certain simple things, the rest of the steps, there has been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. In their way of living and thinking. In their thought and action. They're not talking about money or relationships or drinking, just thinking and actions. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. So, something's being added. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements, the first three steps for some of us. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. Leaving aside the drink question. Why didn't life work? They show how the change came over them when many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness, their awareness of the presence of God or the power, is today the most important fact of their lives. They present a powerful reason why one should have faith. We ask ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the Spirit as were the ancients about the realm? Oh, I skipped something, didn't I? Yeah, Galileo. This world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than in all the millenniums which went before. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best of today, yet in ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round world earth prosperous. Others came near putting Galileo to death for his astronomical heresies, which he had to recant in order to live in exile. And then, right before he died, he said, "Just kidding, I meant it all." And it wasn't until recently, and I don't know if it was in the 80s or the 90s, that the Catholic Church agreed with Galileo that the earth was not the center of everything. So, fixed ideas. That's why it was so hard for scientific inquiry to progress, because they had to put everything in the millennium before. It was all being run by the religious institutions, and they kept a hard hand on that. And so, the common cover that these guys used was alchemy. So we're alchemists. We're trying to turn base metals into precious metals. And honor will go to the church. And they were alchemists, but they were trying to turn base people into spiritual people. They were exploring all kinds of different realms of things under the guise of alchemy. So the point is the fixed ideas are what impaired the progress. That's the point, which is underscoring this thing they've been talking to you and me about for pages and pages and pages. Will you please set aside your prejudice? Will you please set aside your old ideas, your fixed ideas about how everything works and how you are with everything? Will you please set that aside? Because you can't make progress with those old ideas in your face, tying you to the ground. So, we ask ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material? Yes. Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Do you know about Langley? Okay. The guys that know about him will tell you about him. Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proved man could never fly? Yes. Had not people said God had reserved this privilege to the birds? Only 30 years later, the conquest of the air was almost an old story, and airplane travel was in full swing. But in most fields, our generation has witnessed complete liberation of our thinking. Show any longshoreman a Sunday supplement describing a proposal to explore the moon by means of a rocket, and you'll say, I bet they do it. Maybe not so long either. Is not our age characterized by the ease with which we discard old ideas for new, by the complete readiness with which we throw away the theory or gadget which does not work for something which does? So, we had to ask ourselves, why shouldn't we apply to our human problems this same readiness to change our point of view? Interesting, isn't it? I'll give you an example. Well, look what they do to us with cell phones. If you've had a cell phone for the last 5-10 years, you've owned several because they come up with a new, better one. And they convince us we have to have it. So they'll almost give it to us, so we'll renew our plan. But an example would be, typewriter. We start out with a typewriter, get a typewriter. This is a wonderful thing. And then to make copies, we have this thing called carbon paper, and it's just swell. And then someone comes along and says, you know what, this Yahoo out here, Edison, has got electricity, and we've hooked it up to the typewriter. Now you can type a lot faster and do a lot more things. And you go, really? You throw the old one away. Now you got this electric typewriter. You're going, this is really great. This is cool. And then they come out and say, now we got spell correct. You can just press this key back up and it'll erase it. Really? Gosh, this is wonderful. And you just throw that typewriter, get the new one. You got the erasable, and you're going and going and going. And then someone comes along and says, we got these things called computers. You do that's nice, fine. And you're typing away, and they say, we got this thing called word processing. No, really? Let me look at that. And you look at that, and the typewriter's gone. And you don't ever sit there and go, oh, man, I miss my Underwood. It's just you don't long for what didn't work because you've got something that works better, and it's elevated what you do and how you do it, And they're saying, isn't it odd? Now you're in a situation where there's some guys sitting around going, we have a solution for you that will do the very same thing. Isn't your life a little more important than your goddamn typewriter? Fill in the blank. And we sit here and argue about it. That's really an insidious systemic illness that when the solution is presented in front of it, it's so dominant in my thinking that I want to reject the solution. I don't do that anywhere else in my life. But when it comes to dying or living, now I'm in an argument. I'm in a bloody argument with the guys that got it working. The guys that have the proof, the evidence of their experience, not of their theory or their cute little book on how to do it. They did it. This is what they did. And I'm going, that's nice for you, but. And then here comes all my rationalization and explanation for why I don't have to proceed. Damn. When we saw, where am I? Oh, the inventory. This is great. You're still struggling with how good your life's going. Here you go. We were having trouble with personal relationships. Take a look at that. Family, friends, employers, girlfriends, boyfriends, husbands, wives. Couldn't control our emotional natures much. What does that mean? Prone to little outbursts, maybe. Fits of depression, fits of rage. Can't predict when it's going to happen, and I have no control over it. You see this a lot driving around town. You know, you forget to turn your turn signal on, and you cut someone off, and you look in your mirror, and there's a 70-year-old woman giving you the finger, screaming at you, turning blue. And you're going, Jesus, what is that about? You know, what that's about, I believe, is people are living with so much pent-up anger and frustration and fear that when something happens and it just nicks them, they explode. I was like that. I would just have these, you'd step on my foot by accident and you'd be on the floor getting your face rearranged. It was just like the response was totally disproportionate to the stimulus. And they go, what happened? I don't know. I mean, I had whiteouts. You know, before I did my 9-step stuff, I'll tell you a story about emotional natures. I was a musician, and I was working in bars the first several years I was sober, and I was a front man, and I came down off the stage, and there's 3 guys walking towards me, and I knew there was trouble. I mean, I just knew it, you know, and that's the last thing I remember. The next thing I remember, I was on top of a guy, and there were 2 bouncers trying to pull me off this guy, and I had his teeth sticking out of my knuckles. And I just went off on these guys and had no idea. I had no recollection of doing it. And people, you know, in the band, what the hell happened? I don't know. And there was their version, and there was the I don't know version. But the point is, after I did my 9-step stuff, started doing that, I never did that again. And that's an extreme example of it. But, you know, the other stuff, the intimidation stuff, getting in people's faces and using sarcasm and using your size and force of will to intimidate people and control things. That was not uncommon at all with me. That was a way of life. So couldn't control our emotional natures. So try getting up and being joyous for 2 hours. Then plan 1 hour of grief, 2 hours of peace and serenity, and then 2 hours of mild worry. And then back to peace and joy and freedom. I mean, you can't control your emotional nature. That's the point. Prey to misery and depression. Any of that sound familiar? Couldn't make a living. Had a feeling of uselessness. Full of fear. For those of you who don't have any fear, it's your anger. Anger is all fear. It's just loud fear. So if you're fearless, like I was fearless. You couldn't do anything to me. I wasn't afraid to die. I wasn't afraid to get hit in the face. I wasn't afraid to get kicked in the nuts. I just wasn't afraid. And then I found out after I was here for a while, I'm afraid of everything. And funny, as I got in front of my fear, my anger started going down. Because my anger was a cover for how scared I was. We're unhappy. Absolutely. Couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. That was not a priority. Was not a basic solution to these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. Wouldn't you like to have that go away? Isn't that more important? Absolutely. When we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. Where am I with that? That's my life's unmanageable part. How have my ideas worked? To date, the sum total of our ideas have got us in this dining room together. That's the outcome. We're all at different points in this thing, but we're all together, aren't we? We're all in the same room. My ideas didn't work, but the God idea did, apparently. Apparently. I still wasn't willing to say absolutely, but apparently, because I was skeptical of all these people walking around talking about how good they felt and how happy they were and how well their lives were working. I was very skeptical of that. The Wright brothers' almost childish faith that they could build a machine which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. Without that, Nothing could have happened. We agnostics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency would solve our problems, even though self-sufficiency has not worked at all. When others showed us that God's sufficiency worked with them, we began to feel like those who insisted the rights would never fly. Logic is great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. It's not by chance we were given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses, and to draw conclusions. That is one of man's magnificent attributes. We agnostically inclined would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to reasonable approach and interpretation. Hence, we are at pains to tell why we think our present faith is reasonable, why we think it more sane and logical to believe than not to believe, why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt and said, we don't know. That's a great place to be. If you can get to I don't know, that's much better than knowing. I don't know is progress. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? The gloves are coming off. They're asking you, where are you at with that? God either is or isn't. Not maybe, not kinda. Where are you at with that question? Because they're assuming that we're coming to the conclusions they came to in the first two steps. And if we are, we'll get ready to make a decision and turn our thinking and our actions in the third step towards the direction of this power that we are at least willing to believe is there. So what's your choice to be? That's an internal polling. Where are you at with that? Maybe you don't like the concept God is everything or God is nothing, but you can still choose your own concept, but you can't fudge on this. God either is or isn't. Where are you at with that? So, arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. Couldn't duck the issue. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason toward the desired shore of faith. The outlines and the promise of the new land had brought luster to tired eyes and fresh courage to flagging spirits. Friendly hands had stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Couldn't quite buy the whole deal. Perhaps we'd been leaning too heavily on reason that last mile, and we did not like to lose our support. That was natural, but let's think a little more closely. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith? For did we not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in our ability to think? What was that but a sort of faith? Yes, we've been abjectly faithful to the God of reason. Faith, worship, and love were three things I thought I had no capacity for. And they're going to rip this argument apart for me. And they just did on the faith thing. The question isn't, you didn't have faith. The question is, I had faith and I put it in all the wrong things. I had faith in power of ego. I had faith in money. I had faith in booze. I had absolute faith in booze. I knew booze would do for me what I needed, what I couldn't do for myself. I knew that. God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time. So faith is not a problem. Faith is no longer a question. We found, too, that we've been worshipers. Woo! What a state of mental gooseflesh that used to bring on. Had we not variously worshipped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves? And then, with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset or the sea or a flower? Who of us had not loved something or somebody? Now, we got worship, and they got it covered. Anything that you made a god is what you worshipped. Money, power, promotions, degrees, education, relationships, women, sex. We've all been worshipers. And we've all loved something, usually ourselves. But we've all loved something. And usually what I loved is what made me feel good. Something or somebody. How much did these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? Little or nothing, we saw at last. Little or nothing. Why do I like you and I don't like you? Why did I fall in love with her and not her? I don't know. It's not reasonable. It's not logical. It just happens. I don't get to know that. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith, love, or worship. In one form or another, we'd been living by faith and little else. So the door just opened up. Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? I have a thought, and I attach a perception to that thought, and it creates emotion. The emotion creates my mood, and that's what I act out of. That's also what I draw more of to me. When you're sitting in this house, and you're sitting around with guys that are excited about a shot at getting well, and you sit down at that table, and we're all crazy, but we're hopeful, and we're seeing a little light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train, and that table is sitting there, and they're kind of bubbling, and this is exciting. Did you read that? Did you hear this? And then you go to another table, and it's just the opposite. This is bullshit, man. This is crap. This is for wimps. This is weak. This is not for me, which may be very true, but the energy at that table is not going to feel good to be in. And other people of like mind, of like consciousness, will gravitate to that table, just like other people of like consciousness will gravitate to the recovery table. What I'm saying is we got to be very, very careful about what we're thinking, because the thoughts draw more of the same kind of thoughts to us and more of the same kind of people and circumstances. We act out of all that, and we create fear is a great example. Fear creates the very thing you don't want to happen. Take a job interview. I'm afraid I'm not going to get this job. And that's your meditation. I'm afraid I'm not going to get this job. Oh, I'm afraid I won't be able to talk. I'm afraid. Shit. You go into the interview and you blow up. You just can't do it. You're stammering, you're stuttering, you're sweating, you can't look them in the eye, and you leave and say, see, I knew I couldn't do it. I created that with my consciousness. I created that because of the thoughts that I was supporting. I've got to learn to see what thoughts I'm supporting. The best way to do that when you're new in recovery is to look at your actions. If you're not acting right, you'll know, because you won't be getting along with the people in the house. You won't be getting along with the people in your life. They're reflecting back to you, not working. Not working, don't like it, don't like it. So I have to say, what thinking must be supporting this action? Now I get to the perception. Then I get to the base of what I'm doing. I need to change the root of my thinking to get the circumstances to change. No, you're not going to change maybe at all. You might still be irritating as hell to me, but the way I look at you is going to change, and it won't affect me. Now I have some control using spiritual principles to get through my day without making it worse. But until I develop that awareness, which is what you're going to do with steps 10 and 11 and 12, I'm just kind of banging off the walls. We'll have a few good days, we'll have a few bad days. We'll have a few good days, we'll have a few bad days. And if you develop that technique of inventorying your thinking, you'll start turning this thing around. Not by working on your resentment, but by working on your forgiveness. Not by working on your intolerance, by working on your tolerance. Not by working on your judgment, by working on non-judgment. We don't work on the defect, is what I'm trying to say. You work on the defect, it grows. You work on the defect, you're feeding it. It's just getting stronger. You have to identify it, but when the work is changing the thinking. So just do the opposite of the defect that's presenting. You have a different experience. It takes practice. It takes a lot of practice. Not going to happen overnight. But every time you do it, you'll have an effect. You'll get some relief. You'll feel it work. Imagine life without faith. Were nothing left but pure reason, it wouldn't be life. But we believed in life, of course we did. couldn't prove life in the sense that you can prove a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, yet there it was. Could we still say the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons, created out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling on to a destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. The electrons themselves seem more intelligent than that. At least so the chemist said. Hence, we saw that reason isn't everything, especially when the reason is coming through my alcoholic filters. It's all distorted. Neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dependable. Though it emanates from our best minds, what about people who prove man could never fly? And mathematically, they can prove hummingbirds and bumblebees don't have enough lift in their wings to fly. They can prove it mathematically. The problem is no one's told the bumblebee and the hummingbird. So they're flying. Can't explain it. Yet we've been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world. People who rose above their problems. They said, God made these things possible. We only smiled. Nice for you. We had seen spiritual release, but we like to tell ourselves it wasn't true. Because if it was true, I was in trouble. I was in deep trouble. Because it made everything I based my life on up to that point was on a false footing. Actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea, thought, energy of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other, it's there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup. Some kind of God, a God of your own conception. Just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it's only there that he may be found. It was so with us. We found that where we contacted the God idea first was inside. Now, as an atheist, the last night I drank, I couldn't have the thought that God had intervened because I didn't believe in God. And the act of not being able to swallow whiskey or pills did not seem to me to be a spiritual intervention. It seemed to be a very bad night. And the thought that came after that, I can't do this anymore, I give up, did not come from me, it came through me. Because I had dedicated myself to drinking till I was dead. And I had my diagnosis that said that was going to happen. So when that stuff happened, I had no way to interpret it. It's only in retrospect, when I see the thing laid out in front of me, that I realize the power that I didn't believe in had intervened. And it didn't say, here, you're brand new and you're well. It said, you know what? I'm not going to watch this anymore. So you're not going to be able to drink or do drugs anymore. And now I'll get you that far. I'll aim you in the right direction, see what you can do with that. Just like holding my nose above water by the ears, just... But it has to be a God within me, because I have to have a relationship to that power. I can't relate to your power. I can celebrate that power expressing through you and in your life, but it's not my experience. That idea is in me. We can only clear the ground a bit. If our testimony sweeps away prejudice, there's the word again, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself, then, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, with this approach, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. So here's the deal. I come in here, and I'm miserable. My hair's on fire, and I can't stand being alive. And some of you guys in these meetings say, well, I don't feel that way anymore. I'm beyond that. I'm transcended that. I've grown into a relationship with this power, and by God, life's a lot better. And then they'll report to you, and what I did is I did these steps, and I'm doing these steps. And I'll go, that's nice. You hear that enough, pretty soon you think, maybe I ought to try these steps. What a concept, you know. And so I say, I believe that you did this, and I believe that you're having this experience. It's not my belief, but I believe that it's true for you. So I'm going to take these actions based on that belief. Now I have an experience, and the next time I need to do that step around my resentment, around my fear, around my anxiety, I go back in faith because I know that it works because now I've acquired an experience of it. And that's how it grows, experientially. I got to test this God idea. You test it in your thinking, but you got to test it in your actions. And it's hard. It's hard, depending on what the particular area is for you. But the thing that I see in in recovery that's most systemic and most damning is fear. You know, we can deal with the resentments, the shame, and the guilt of the past with the inventory, with the restitution of the 9th step. We can deal with the harms done. We can get free of our past. But it's much harder to get free of our future. That's what fear is. So I'm trapped in this idea of something that's going to happen in the future, and I'm reacting to it as if it's already happened. Because you see, the mind doesn't know the difference between something that's really happened and something that's imagined. Example, Chicago, they took a couple of college basketball teams and they drilled one, shooting free throws, X number of hours a day for so many weeks. The other group, they put in a classroom, and all they did was visualize. All they did was visualize shooting free throws. They didn't touch a ball for weeks. When they got out and they tested them all, the percent differences was 2 or 3%. If the mind doesn't know the difference between something that's real or imagined, something that's happened or not happened, then everything that I imagine, my fear that I'm putting out there, my mind thinks it's real. That's why we have such strong emotional reactions to this stuff, because we think it's already happened. So I'm building my defense, I'm building my response, I'm defending myself completely against something that hasn't even happened. And I have no energy to spend on now, this moment. Prayer, meditation, practicing the principles. Where do you practice them? Now. You don't practice them later, you practice them in the now. If I'm not present in the now, I can't possibly practice them. I'm practicing some of the tenets of my disease. Fear, future, resentment, past. Fear, future, resentment, past. In this book, you'll read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that so much should be told now. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. Our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration. Business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide. These calamities in his immediate family embittered and depressed him. Post-war disillusionment, ever more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of self-destruction. One night, when confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. He was approached. He didn't call. He didn't say, I'd like to talk to someone. There was someone there saying, I'd like to talk to someone. Our friend's gorge rose as he bitterly cried out his lunch. If there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me. Now there's his concept. God is my servant. He's got it asked backwards. I am God's servant. God is my servant. If there is a God, he hasn't done anything for me. Okay? But later alone in his room, he asked the question, is it possible that all the religious people I've known are wrong? While pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. Thought came. Who are you to say there is no God? This man recounts that he tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by a conviction of the presence of God. It poured over and through him with the certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood. The barriers he'd built through the years were swept away. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love, obviously his concept of God, stepped from the bridge of reason to the shore of faith. For the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his Creator. Powerful experience. Very similar to Bill's. Thus was our friend's cornerstone fixed in place, his starting point, the thing that he based everything off of from that point forward. No later vicissitude, no later challenges has shaken it. His alcoholic problem was taken away that very night years ago. It disappeared. Save for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of drink has never returned. And at such times a great revulsion has risen up in him. Seemingly, he could not drink even if he would. God had restored his sanity. What is this but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. Circumstances that he created himself, circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his Maker, then he knew. So your surrender in the first step is a spiritual act. Whether you believe in God or not is irrelevant. You have to be surrendering to something. Even if it's just the truth, capital T. That will suffice. But you can't surrender to nothing. Even so has God restored us all to our right minds. To this man the revelation was sudden. Some of us grow into it more slowly, but he has come to all who have honestly sought him. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. That's the deal. God comes at my invitation. It doesn't mean that I'm greater than God. It means that God will not enter my consciousness without my invitation. My invitation is set aside the resentment, set aside the fear, set aside my fixed ideas, set aside my prejudice. That's my invitation. Then I say, help me. Help me or show me something. God, So, we've considered at depth, according to Alcoholics Anonymous now, the proposition of the first two steps. Am I powerless over alcohol or not? Is my life unmanageable or not? Am I willing to believe, or do I believe that there's a power greater than me? And 4, do I think that power could restore my thinking? And the basis of the work you're going to do from this point out is going to be the quality of that, the effect of that, the experience of that is going to be predicated by where you're at with those questions. You can't be kind of powerless. You can't be powerless over alcohol and not be powerless to manage your life. Because I don't think there's probably a person in here that doesn't have some problems in their life. Just a wild shot around money and sex, or some derivative of that. But the point is, the next chapter is going to be how it works, and they're going to take us through this thing, and we're going to do a third step. So, the miracle, he was talking about this miracle this guy had experienced in the hospital. The miracle is that somehow this admittedly insane mind that's totally morphed with this thing called alcoholism now has been able to perceive some truth. Enough to be able to admit to myself at depth that I have no power. Admit to myself at depth that my life's unmanageable by me. I had no problem with that. Becoming willing to believe in the possibility took a little time. And then making a decision to turn my thinking and my actions over to the care of that possibility was another process that we'll talk about when we get into steps more. So we're done for today, and I'll see you Monday.